Hi, my name's Paul, and I play drums and I write lyrics for a band called the Wise Man's Fear. And today I'm just going to be walking through some of the concepts and storyline behind the lyrics that might not be super apparent on surface. Before we dive into the first track, I want to talk about a couple of metaphors that are recurring throughout the record that will help make sense of some of the lyrics. A big theme throughout the album is the earth, and that is drawing a parallel to the mind. So above earth represents clarity, whereas below the earth represents the subconscious, and the deeper into the earth the characters go, the deeper introspectively they're looking, the deeper in their own minds they go. So let's go ahead and dive in. Track one is called The Relics of Nihlux. In track one, we see a group of 5 warriors who are gathering in a dungeon under a castle in secrecy in the dead of night. They're coming together to accomplish a common goal and to establish a quest for themselves, and that is to destroy 5 evil relics that have been around since the ancient days. And if you listen to our past records, the events of this record happen 1,000 years in the future relative to those other 2. So these relics that the 5 warriors have been around since our second record, The Lost City, and they belonged to 5 generals of the antagonist of that record named Chaotica. So the warriors decide that for the good of everybody, they need to take these relics and go destroy them, but the only place that they can destroy them is a valley that's hidden below the earth called the Valley of Kings. And in the Valley of Kings, there is the River of Life, which contains splits to both the wellspring and the illspring. And those are sort of the sources of good and evil in the world that are originating from the valley. In the verses, there's some symbolism talking about the warriors, and that includes calling them men of oak, iron, steel, stone. It's to point out that they're strong, cunning, skilled, and brave warriors, but it also lists some flaws that they have, and that is to say they are going on the quest for some ulterior motives, such as fame, wealth, and renown. And they're not in it altruistically to try to help out other people, they're in it for themselves. So in the chorus, it talks about binding travelers by flame, and that basically is indicating that the 5 travelers swear a blood pact, and they swear to carry out this quest or die trying, essentially. It's also worth mentioning each of the 5 characters that are represented here stand for different broad worldviews. Those 5 worldviews are atheistic existentialism, monotheistic existentialism, absurdism, nihilism, and then the final warrior is just a blank slate who has no preset philosophy or worldview and is just navigating the world without a set code. The last thing to point out about this track is the title itself. The word Nihlux is the combination of the Latin nihil for nothing and lux for light. So it together joins to create the word Nihlux, meaning no light or anti-light. So the relics are from a period of darkness and they are abject evil, so that's why the warriors are setting out to destroy them. That basically sums up track 1. It's sort of setting the scene and setting the tone for the record, and it's introducing us to these characters who are going to be going throughout a quest for the rest of the record. Track 2 is called Breath of the Wild, which, as you may have guessed, was named after the Zelda game, which is a blast to play and sort of represents the open world feeling that we want to evoke with this song. The morale of the company is really high and the world feels like anything's possible to them, and they're super devoted to the quest and excited to be helping out humanity. What makes the quest difficult for them is that the Valley of Kings has been lost to living memory for centuries. Nobody knows where the entrance to the valley is, so they're trying to retrace historical steps and essentially clue hunt to find their way to the opening of the Valley of Kings. To do that, they begin to make their way towards an oracle that has been around for eons called the Tree of Life. And that brings us to track 3. Track 3 is called The Tree of Life. In this song, after months of searching, the companions finally find this oracle that is the Tree of Life, and it's the oldest instance of life in this universe, in Numa. And the tree has seen the foundation of mankind and watched empires rise and fall, and so it knows the location of the Valley of Kings, and it offers to help the group, but it does warn them that everything may not be as it appears, and if they find what they're looking for, the result may not be exactly what they had hoped for. To communicate this point, the tree tells the travelers about a monk or a holy man who it once guided to the Valley of Kings, and the account from the monk says that the light dies at the end of the world, and if you stand there with your eyes closed, you can see the darkness as it comes to life. So sort of foreboding, evil historical account of what the valley was like for somebody who made it there. So the tree tells them the location of the valley and mentions a keeper of keys in the chorus of this song, and that is sort of foreshadowing to some guardians that are present in the Valley of Kings that will be encountered by the company. Track 4 is the Forest of Illusions. If you have heard our record, The Lost City, there's a direct bridge between this track and Blackroot Forest from that record. The Forest of Illusions is a far future version of Blackroot Forest. Basically, Blackroot Forest after 1,000 years of growth and expansion and sort of unwinding. So at the heart of the forest is evil, and there's a evil counterpart to the Tree of Life. That is this evil tree, and it's sort of polluting the forest. But the forest also hides the entrance to the Valley of Kings. And to do that, there is magic that's sort of radiating throughout the forest that is illusionary magic that causes people to get lost and distracted or forget why they've even come to the forest. And as the company is walking through the forest trying to find the entrance to the valley, one of the members sort of sees a will-o'-the-wisp type distraction and follows these lights off of the path and becomes lost to the forest. And by the time the company realizes that he's gone, they've gotten through the forest to the other side, and they've actually gotten to the entrance of the valley. And so there's sort of discussion among them about whether they should go back and try to look for their lost comrade, or if they should just press on and consider it a sacrifice that he made for the good of the goal. Another fun little historical note about this track is there's reference in the lyrics to the ruins that pass us by, and that is actually the castle from Castle in the Clouds, where it fell out of the sky and landed. There are a bunch of ruins in the Forest of Illusions. So if you've heard Castle in the Clouds, that's sort of a fun little Easter egg for you. Track 5 is The Cave. The Cave takes place directly after the company has traveled through the Forest of Illusions, and they're shaken by the loss of one of their members. They're down to 4, but the track itself is a parallel to Plato's allegory of the cave. In that dialogue, Plato writes about these creatures who have been living in a cave for so long that they don't remember what sunlight is like, and they're staring at the walls of the cave, seeing essentially shadows that are being cast from the outside light, and they're perceiving that as reality. So there are these spindly dancing shadows on the walls, and it's freaky and horrific, but that's what they perceive the world to be like, and they think that's normal and everything's terrifying. The moral of Plato's dialogue there is that if a person does leave the cave, at first the light outside, which is representative of truth, is blinding because it's so bright. But once you become acclimated to it, you see that the life that you were living inside the Cave of Ignorance was just a terrible shadow of what the actual world has to offer. This track also marks a bit of a inflection point for the group. They reach a point of no return where they have to decide that they are not going to save their comrade who is lost in the Forest of Illusions, and they decide instead to press on into the cave towards the valley. And that starts to sow some dissent within the group. This is also sort of the first point where the earth being representative of the subconscious comes into play. Once they enter the cave, things start to be weird, and the album takes a little bit of a bizarre turn. Within the cave, there is a magical radiation that is coming from the valley that they can feel, and it's starting to distort space and direction around them. So they find themselves walking, trying to find the actual valley itself, and they keep walking through spatial loops, being sent back to where they were, or perceiving things that aren't there, or having direction be totally confused and everything is jumbled and turned upside down. Everything that they're seeing and experiencing is very taxing on their minds, and eventually one member of the group completely unravels and loses his sanity. The rest of the group sees him and finds him just staring at a wall, speaking nonsense, and has just basically witnessed his mind come completely undone. So while the cave is paralleling Plato's The Cave, it also is making a reference to Jules Verne's book, Journey to the Center of the Earth, where the protagonists find a cave that leads them into the center of the Earth. There's a pretty direct correlation there. But now the remaining 3 are left with an even more shaken resolve after losing one of their members to madness. They have to figure out if they want to still continue with the journey or if they should turn back and try to save themselves. Track number 6 is called What Went Wrong, and this track is pointing out the dissent and the discord between the three remaining members of the group. One of the members thinks that instead of pursuing the valley, they should turn back because they've already lost 2 members and it's madness to try to pursue it still. The other 2 are holding fast to the blood pact that they signed, and they think they should press on regardless. So this point in the album starts a rift that is eventually going to become a full-blown schism between these 2 different outlooks. Track 7 is a little shorter. It's called The River and the Rock, and that title comes from a parable from within Numa, this imaginary universe. And the point of the parable is that a rock sitting in a river is always going to be fighting against the current. The current's always going to be trying to move it, but it won't move. Eventually it will erode, but it will no longer be itself if it concedes to the way of the river. So the parallel here is that the 2 viewpoints of continuing down to the valley and turning back and going home are fundamentally opposed, and they'll never see eye to eye. If they do reach an agreement, it'll be because one of the parties has fundamentally changed who they are and what they believe. So it's sort of signifying that there can be no rectifying the situation here, and they're just doomed to always disagree. Track number 8 is called The Sands of Time, and whereas earlier in the cave, space and direction were being distorted because of magical radiation, now that they have gone deeper and deeper into the earth, they're seeing more intense magical radiation, and it is distorting space-time around them. So time itself is being thrown back and forth, and they don't know how much time has passed, and they're down there for decades despite not knowing it. At this point in the journey, the 2 people who are still pursuing the valley have split off from the third who wants to try to return home. He's trying to find his way home, and they're trying to find their way to the valley. There's a moment in the second verse talking about wishing on the stars and them falling. And that is a metaphor for the hope that the 2 experience that they're still going to find the valley, and how they're wishing on these stars, but they're misguided and sort of delusional about the hope that they have. Track 9 is called The Door to Nowhere. So after 20 years of accelerated time, the 2 that are looking for the valley arrive at the final door that will lead to the Valley of Kings, and also the third, who abandoned ship and was trying to go home, has found himself there. And they both meet up right at this door to nowhere, which is the final barrier between them and the valley. By now, the magical radiation is so strong that it's ripping reality apart, and it's becoming impossible to determine what's real and what isn't. There's a moment in this song where the group actually opens the door itself, and this marks a crossing of the Rubicon that can't be undone. The lyrics talk about the box that held this pestilence now lies shattered at my feet, referring to Pandora's box, and how once that box was opened and pestilence was released to the world, it could never be contained again. There's sort of a similar thing going on here, where now that they have cracked open this final barrier, there's no turning back, and they can never undo what they've done here. The chorus of this track is essentially the lead character who has no developed worldview calling out to his lost brother who is trying to escape from the underground and is trying to run away from all this. He's basically trying to remind him of the pact that he swore and get him to come back to his senses and return to his earlier convictions. There's some fun Easter eggs on this track for fantasy fans as well. We sampled 3 different Age of Empires 2 sound effects throughout the course of the song, and then Joe has a line that says "drums in the deep" to reference the Fellowship of the Ring when they're in the mines of Moria in a sort of comparable situation. That movie was a pretty big influence and inspiration on this record. Track 10 is called Firefall, and Firefall happens right after the 2 parties have opened the door to nowhere and they confront each other. So we have, on the one hand, the person who left the party and wanted to try to return home, and then the other hand, we have the 2 that have still held true to the course and are trying to complete the mission in the valley. They find each other and butt head to head, and 20 years of wandering around in this magical, bizarre hellscape has embittered them really deeply towards each other. And so Firefall is this culmination of conflict and bitterness that has grown between them over time. The lyrics are pretty straightforward on this one. It's just a dialogue between the 2 groups talking about how their only priority now is to defeat the other group. and they've both sort of lost sight of what they initially had set out to do. By the end of this track, the warrior who had turned away to go home has killed one of the two that were still trying to go for the valley, and then the final person who has held true to the quest has in turn killed the traitor. So it's down to just one of the 5 warriors now, and he pushes through the door to nowhere and directly into the Valley of Kings. Track 11 is Valley of Kings, the title track, and this is the culmination of all of the events of the record. Everything finally sort of comes to a head here. So after a lifetime of searching and traumatic loss, the final warrior has found the Valley of Kings. And inside the valley, we see massive stone statues that contain the spirits of ancient kings from this universe. This is represented on the album art, and also if you look closely on the album art, you can see there is the River of Life running straight through the middle of the floor, and into the river are 2 roots dipping in, one leading up to the Tree of Life, and one leading to the evil poisonous tree that's in Blackroot Forest, aka the Forest of Illusions. So the ancient guardian kings allow the final warrior who has entered the valley to drink from the River of Life, because that's the only way to acquire the power to destroy the relics. It's a little bit of a monkey's paw scenario here, where he drinks from the River of Life in order to gain the power to destroy the relics, and he does that. But while he has that power, he also has gained immortality by drinking from the River of Life, and he has become an indentured servant to these ancient kings that are living in the valley. And so he becomes this timeless being who they use to deliver a message of warning sort of throughout history over and over again, stuck on this time loop, and send him back at the end of this track, send him back to the very beginning of Castle in the Clouds, where he shows up as an old man in a cloak who warns the knight against his quest. So the end of this song uses the direct chords and samples from Megalith, the first track of Castle in the Clouds, and they're sort of meant to bleed into each other, because at the end of this record, we start to see a cycle of the 3 albums repeating on loop for eternity, and this main character now is trapped, wandering through time, warning people against his mistakes. When the character drinks from the River of Life, he also has a vision of a sunken horizon covered in a million dead cities. And this is him sort of seeing through time and space and seeing how the cycle is repeating and the events of the Lost City keep happening and islands keep warring and sinking. This record also uses a narrative tone throughout the whole album to sort of indicate that the conflict type is man versus self, whereas in Castle in the Clouds you have man versus environment, and then in the Lost City you have man versus man. So the usage of the man versus self for this record sort of rounds off a trilogy with the 3 types of conflict. And also, if you take the album covers themselves, you can stack them one over another: Castle in the Clouds, The Lost City, and Valley of Kings, and they line up spatially and sort of draw this timeline throughout the looping trilogy. So that's it, guys. That's the story behind the lyrics of Valley of Kings. We hope you guys enjoyed this little explanation, and we hope you'll go listen to that record. We put our hearts and souls into it, and we're really proud of it. So thank you so much for listening.